I want you to close your eyes for a second and think about the last time your mind told you something terrible was about to happen. Maybe you woke up at 3 in the morning, convinced your career was falling apart. Maybe you replayed a conversation 100 times, certain everyone was judging you. Maybe you scrolled through your phone feeling like everyone else had it figured out while you were drowning. Here's what I need you to understand right now. And I mean really understand. Not just hear. Your brain was lying to you. Not because it's broken, not because something's wrong with you, but because that's what untrained minds do. They lie, they exaggerate, they catastrophize. They turn shadows into monsters and whispers into screams. And the worst part? We believe them. We believe every anxious thought, every worst-case scenario, every story our mind spins at 2 in the morning when we can't sleep. We treat these thoughts like they're facts, like they're reality, like they're who we are. But here's the truth that changed my life, and I think it might change yours too. You are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are just events happening in your mind, like clouds passing through the sky. Some are dark and heavy, some are light and fluffy, but none of them are the sky itself. None of them are you. The ancient Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. They knew that the biggest battle we ever fight isn't out there in the world. It's in here, between our ears. And they developed a system, a practical, powerful way of thinking that doesn't just help you feel better for a few minutes. It actually restructures how your brain processes reality. It cuts through the noise. It separates what's real from what's imagined. It gives you back control over your own mind. I'm not talking about positive thinking or pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm talking about something much deeper, something that actually works when life gets hard, and I mean really hard. The kind of hard where affirmations and vision boards feel like jokes. The Stoics lived through plagues, wars, betrayals, losses that would break most people. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. They found peace in the middle of chaos. They found strength when everything was falling apart, not because they were special or superhuman, but because they understood how the mind works and how to work with it instead of against it. So, over the next 40 minutes or so, I want to take you on a journey. Not a journey out into the world, but a journey inward, into your own mind, into the places where your thoughts are formed, where your fears are born, where your anxieties breed and multiply in the dark. We're going to shine a light in there. We're going to examine these thoughts the way a scientist examines evidence, with curiosity instead of judgment, with clarity instead of emotion. And I'm going to show you exactly how to apply Stoic wisdom to your modern life, to your anxiety, to your stress, to that voice in your head that never shuts up. Because here's what nobody tells you. That voice, that constant narrator in your mind telling you stories about who you are and what's going to happen, it's not trying to hurt you. It's actually trying to protect you. Your brain evolved over millions of years to keep you alive, to spot danger, to expect the worst so you could prepare for it. The problem is, your brain still thinks you're living on the savannah running from lions. It doesn't know you're sitting in your apartment, scrolling through social media. So it treats every email from your boss like a life-threatening emergency. It turns every social interaction into a survival test. It keeps you up at night worrying about things that haven't happened and probably never will. And here's what makes this especially cruel. Your brain doesn't distinguish between physical danger and social danger. The same alarm system that evolved to save you from predators now fires at full volume when someone leaves you on read. A notification lights up your phone, cortisol spike, someone disagrees with you online, fight or flight response. You have to give a presentation at work, Your body reacts like you're about to wrestle a bear. Your ancient survival system is working overtime in a world where actual survival is rarely at stake, and you're paying the price in chronic stress, anxiety, and exhaustion. But here's where it gets interesting. Because while your brain might be ancient, it's also remarkably adaptable. It can learn, it can change, and most importantly, it can be retrained. The Stoics understood something profound about human nature. They knew that we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we interpret and respond to what happens. They knew that the stories we tell ourselves about events matter more than the events themselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Think about what he's saying here. The thing that's bothering you, the thing that's keeping you up at night, the thing that's making your heart race and your palms sweat, that thing isn't actually causing your suffering. Your interpretation of that thing is causing your suffering. This isn't just ancient philosophy, this is neuroscience. Your brain is constantly creating meaning from raw sensory data. It's constantly telling you stories about what things mean, what they say about you, what they predict about your future. And most of the time, you're not even aware this is happening. You experience the interpretation as if it were objective reality. You think, this situation is terrible. But what's actually true is, this situation exists, and my brain has labeled it as terrible. See the difference? One feels fixed, unchangeable, objective. The other reveals a gap, a space where choice exists. That gap is where your power lives. That space between what happens and what you make it mean is where freedom exists. And learning to operate in that space is what transforms anxiety from a tyrant into a teacher. I'm not suggesting you can simply think positive thoughts and make all your problems disappear. That's not how this works. Your anxiety is real. Your stress is real. The challenges you face are real. But the way you relate to those challenges, the meaning you assign to them, the stories you tell yourself about them, those are choices you're making, whether you realize it or not. And when you start making those choices consciously, when you start questioning the automatic narratives your brain generates, something remarkable happens. The world doesn't necessarily change, but your experience of the world changes completely. You begin to see that most of what you've been afraid of exists only in your imagination. You begin to notice that you've been living in a story, often a frightening story, that you didn't consciously choose and don't have to continue. And what's remarkable is that once you realize you've been living in a story, you also realize you can choose a different one, not by lying to yourself, not by pretending everything is perfect when it isn't, but by questioning the interpretation you've layered over reality. Let me give you a concrete example. You're in a meeting and your manager criticizes your work. The immediate story that arises might be, "I'm incompetent. They're going to fire me. I'll lose everything. I'm a failure." That's a story, a narrative that extends far beyond the simple fact of what happened. The fact is, someone said words. That's it. Everything else, the meaning, the prediction, the identity conclusion, is something you added. And what's liberating is that you can notice this. You can catch yourself mid-story and ask, is this actually true, or is this just one possible interpretation among many? The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control. There's what happens that's beyond your control, and there's your judgment about what happens that's entirely within your control. Most of your suffering lives in that second category, in the interpretations and stories you tell yourself about events. When you begin to separate facts from your interpretation of facts, something extraordinary happens. The world becomes less personal. That doesn't mean it becomes cold or that you stop caring. It means you stop taking everything as a referendum on your worth, your future, your identity. Your colleague doesn't respond to your message. The anxious mind creates a story. They're angry at me. I did something wrong. They don't respect me. But what if they're just busy? What if their phone died? What if they meant to respond and forgot? All of these are equally possible, yet we reflexively choose the interpretation that causes us the most pain. Why do we do this? The mind has evolved to scan for threats. It's trying to protect you, but it's using ancient software designed for physical dangers, predators, rival tribes, environmental hazards. It hasn't caught up with the modern world, where most threats are social and abstract. So it treats a delayed text message with the same alarm system designed for spotting a predator in the grass. When you understand this, you can start to work with your mind rather than being its victim. You can thank it for trying to protect you and gently remind it that not every uncertainty is a catastrophe waiting to happen. This practice of separating fact from interpretation is not about becoming detached or unemotional. I still feel everything: joy, disappointment, hope, sadness. But I'm no longer drowning in the secondary suffering, the anxiety about my anxiety, the stories about what everything means, the endless mental rehearsals of terrible futures. And here's what nobody tells you about this shift. It doesn't just reduce suffering, it actually increases your capacity for joy and presence. When you're not constantly bracing for disaster, you can actually be here for what's happening now. When you stop using anxiety as your primary motivational tool, something remarkable happens. You discover you've been carrying around this incredibly sophisticated emotional alarm system that was designed for actual emergencies, and you've been setting it off 20 times a day for things like project deadlines and difficult conversations. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a bear attack and a tough email you need to send. It just knows: threat detected, flood the body with cortisol, prepare for battle or escape. And when you're doing that multiple times a day, every day, for years, you're essentially running your engine in the red zone constantly. Nothing breaks faster than a system that never gets to rest. I spent decades believing that my anxiety was what made me good at what I did. That if I stopped worrying, I'd become complacent, mediocre. That the fear was the fuel. But that's like saying you need to keep your hand on a hot stove to remember that heat exists. The awareness doesn't require the burn. Here's what actually happens when you release compulsive preparation. You get better at responding, not reacting, responding. There's a world of difference. Reacting is what happens when you're already flooded with stress hormones before the situation even arrives. You're jumpy, defensive, rigid. Responding is what happens when you meet the moment as it actually is, not as your anxiety predicted it would be. Think about the last time you over-prepared for something, and I mean really over-prepared. Maybe you wrote 17 drafts of an email that needed 3. Maybe you rehearsed a conversation so many times in your head that when the actual conversation happened, you weren't even present for it. You were too busy monitoring whether reality matched your script. That's not preparation. That's anxiety cosplaying as productivity. Real preparation is gathering the information you need, making a plan, and then trusting yourself to handle whatever emerges. It's staying loose, not rigid. It's building competence, not building walls. And the strangest part, when you stop trying to control everything through worry, you often perform better, because you're not splitting your energy between the task and managing your anxiety about the task. You're just doing the thing. Athletes call this flow state. Musicians call it being in the pocket. It's what happens when you're so present that the self-conscious, anxious narrator in your head finally shuts up. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius didn't spend his time catastrophizing about every possible way the empire could fall. He prepared, yes. He planned, absolutely. But then he met each day as it came, with presence and clarity. "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wrote. Not because he was naive about how bad things could get, but because he understood where his actual leverage was. Your leverage isn't in worrying harder. It's in being more present, more responsive, more grounded in what's actually happening instead of what might happen. That's where your power lives. So what does this look like practically? How do you actually interrupt the preparation spiral when it starts? Because it will start. These patterns don't just vanish because you understand them intellectually. They're grooves worn deep in your nervous system, and they need retraining. And here's what that retraining looks like in practice. You're going to have moments where you slip back, where you catch yourself performing again, optimizing your words for maximum impact, checking mentally if someone seems pleased with you. This is not failure. This is data. This is your nervous system showing you exactly where the work needs to happen. I remember about 6 months into this process, I was having coffee with someone I'd just met. Smart guy. And I noticed halfway through that I was doing it again, that subtle calibration, that micro-adjustment of my personality to match what I thought he'd respect. Not even for any reason. There was nothing to gain here. It was just the old program running automatically. And instead of beating myself up about it, I just noticed it. Like watching a wave roll in. There it is. The pattern, still alive, still trying to protect me, the only way it knows how. Then I made a choice. Mid-conversation, I shifted. I stopped performing and just talked. Said something I actually thought instead of something calculated to impress. And you know what happened? The conversation got better, more real, more interesting. Because here's what I've learned. People can feel it when you're performing. They might not consciously know what they're sensing, but something registers as slightly off, slightly calculated. And when you drop that, when you stop managing their perception and just show up as you are, there's this almost audible sigh of relief in the interaction. Not because you're so amazing, but because authenticity is so rare that people are starving for it. The retraining happens in these small moments. Every time you choose honest over impressive. Every time you let someone see you confused, uncertain, still figuring it out. Every time you set a boundary that might disappoint someone, but honors what you actually want. These aren't dramatic moments. You're not going to have a montage with inspiring music playing in the background. You're just going to have Tuesday afternoon, and a choice, and a small act of courage that no one else will even notice. But you'll notice. Your nervous system will notice. And slowly, new grooves start to form. I want to be clear about something, though. This isn't about becoming careless with your words or actions. It's not about dumping every unfiltered thought onto people in the name of authenticity. There's a difference between being real and being reckless. The difference is this. Are you speaking from fear or from groundedness? Are you reacting or responding? Are you trying to prove something or simply sharing what's true? When you're operating from your authentic self, there's actually more consideration for others, not less. Because you're not relating to them as mirrors that reflect your worth back to you. You're relating to them as actual people with their own experience. You can be honest without being harsh, direct without being cruel, real without being reactive. But you can only do this when you're not constantly managing your image. When you're not using every interaction as evidence in the case for or against your worth. That's the freedom on the other side of this. Not the freedom to do whatever you want without consequences, the freedom to show up as yourself and trust that's enough. To stop carrying the exhausting weight of being your own PR manager. And here's the thing that might surprise you. When you stop trying to control how people see you, you often end up making a stronger impression anyway. Not because you're trying to, but because presence is magnetic. Because people are drawn to those rare individuals who seem comfortable in their own skin. But, and this is crucial if you do this work with that as the goal, it won't work. If you think, great, I'll be authentic so people will like me more, you're just adding another layer to the performance, another strategy, another way of trying to extract worth from external sources. This has to be about you, about your own freedom, about living in alignment with what you actually value rather than constantly calculating what will make you valuable to others. Because here's what nobody tells you about freedom: it doesn't arrive on schedule. It's not handed to you when you turn 18, or when you graduate, or when you finally escape your hometown. Freedom is something you claim, inch by inch, day by day, often in the face of tremendous resistance, especially from the people who supposedly love you most. Your family's discomfort with your independence, that's not evidence you're doing something wrong. It's evidence you're doing something different. And difference always triggers fear in systems that depend on sameness to function. Think about what they're actually asking you to do. They want you to sacrifice the next decade, the decade when you're most energetic, most capable of taking risks, most able to recover from failure so they can feel less anxious about your future. They want you to trade your 20s for their peace of mind. That's not love, that's a transaction disguised as concern. Real love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. Real love doesn't require you to mortgage your present for someone else's vision of your future. And I know you've been told your whole life that family comes first, that you owe them, that their sacrifices mean you're obligated to sacrifice in return. But let me ask you something. When does that cycle end? When do you get to stop paying interest on a debt you never agreed to take on? Your parents made choices. They had children. They raised you. And yes, maybe they struggled. Maybe they gave up things. But those were their choices, made by adults, about their own lives. You didn't ask to be born. You didn't sign a contract promising to live according to their blueprint. The guilt you feel, that's cultural programming. It's the voice of every generation that successfully convinced the next generation to repeat their mistakes in the name of tradition. And tradition, let's be honest about what tradition often is. It's peer pressure from dead people. It's the accumulated weight of, this is how we've always done it, crushing the life out of, this is how it could be done. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You are not required to live a life that makes you miserable just because it makes them comfortable. Here's what I want you to understand. When you finally choose yourself, when you finally say, I'm going to live according to my own values, not yours, some people will be upset. They will call you selfish. They will say you've changed. They will mourn the version of you that never questioned them. Let them mourn. Let them be upset. Their discomfort is not your emergency. Because on the other side of that discomfort, yours and theirs is a version of your life that's actually yours. Not a performance, not a compromise, not a slow suicide by 1,000 small surrenders. Yours. I think about this woman I knew who was training to be a doctor. Not because she wanted to be a doctor, but because 3 generations of her family had been doctors, and it was simply assumed. She was 26, deep in residency, working 100-hour weeks, and she was falling apart. Panic attacks in hospital bathrooms, crying herself to sleep, taking pills just to function. One day she just stopped, walked out, quit medicine entirely. Her family didn't speak to her for 2 years. 2 years of silence, of being treated like she'd died. And you know what she told me? Those 2 years were the loneliest of my life, and also the first time I could breathe. She became a photographer. She's not rich, she's not prestigious, but she's alive in a way she never was in that hospital. And eventually, not quickly, but eventually her family came around. Not because they suddenly understood, but because they realized she wasn't coming back, that the choice was accept who she actually was or lose her entirely. That's often what it takes. Not permission, not understanding. Just the unwavering commitment to yourself that forces everyone else to decide, do they want you in your life, or do they want their fantasy of you? And here's what happens when you finally make that commitment, when you stop negotiating with people who never intended to honor the real you. The relationships that were built on your performance start to crumble. The friendships that required your silence begin to fade. The connections that needed your smallness to survive, they die. And I won't lie to you, watching those relationships disintegrate feels like betrayal at first. You'll question everything. You'll wonder if you made a mistake. You'll second-guess the very authenticity you fought so hard to claim. But then something remarkable happens. Space opens up. The energy you were spending on maintaining those false connections, the mental gymnastics, the emotional labor, the constant monitoring of your words and actions suddenly becomes available. It's like you've been carrying 50-pound weights on each ankle your entire life, and someone finally cuts them free. You can move differently now, think differently, breathe times differently. And into that space, that clean, honest space, different people start to arrive. Not better people, necessarily. Not higher quality humans, just people who can actually see you, people who don't need you to be smaller, quieter, or more convenient. People who meet your authenticity with their own instead of with fear or judgment. These relationships feel different from the ground up. There's less performance, less negotiation. You're not constantly calibrating your responses to maintain their approval. You're not editing yourself in real time, running every sentence through the filter of, will this make them uncomfortable? Instead, there's this wild, almost foreign sensation, ease, not the false ease of people-pleasing, where you've smoothed yourself into such an inoffensive shape that no one could possibly object, but the real ease that comes from being fully present without armor, without strategy, without the exhausting work of being someone you're not. And here's what nobody tells you about this transition. The people you were so afraid of losing, the ones whose departure felt like it would kill you, most of them never actually leave. Because here's what happens when you stop shrinking, when you finally stand at your full height and say, this is who I am, this is what I need, this is what I will no longer tolerate. The people who genuinely love you adapt, not immediately, not without struggle or discomfort. There will be friction. There will be conversations that feel impossible. There will be moments where the old dynamics fight desperately to reassert themselves. But if the foundation was real, if beneath all the people-pleasing and performance there was actual love, actual respect, actual care, those relationships evolve. They grow. They become more times honest, more intimate, more fulfilling than they ever were when you were pretending. Your mother, who always demanded your emotional caretaking, she might surprise you by rising to meet your boundaries. Not perfectly. Not without resistance. But she might discover that she's actually capable of the emotional self-sufficiency you never gave her room to develop. Your friend, who always needed you to be the supporting character in their drama, they might find that they prefer a relationship where you're both protagonists, where your life gets equal airtime, where the friendship is actually reciprocal, Your partner who benefited from your silence. They might realize they'd rather have a real relationship with a whole person than a comfortable relationship with half of one. Or they might not. Some people will choose their fantasy. Some people will walk away rather than adjust to the reality of who you actually are. Some people will fight to restore the old dynamic because your transformation threatens their own carefully constructed world. And that, as brutal as it sounds, is information. It tells you exactly who was committed to the performance of you and who is genuinely committed to the evolution of you. And here's where most people get trapped. They interpret the distance as rejection. They see someone withdraw and they immediately internalize it as a verdict on their worth. But that interpretation is backwards. When someone can't handle your growth, it's not a reflection of your value, it's a reflection of their capacity. And the most compassionate thing you can do, both for them and for yourself, is to let them go with grace. Not with bitterness, not with speeches about how they never really knew you, but with the quiet understanding that people are only capable of meeting you as deeply as they've met themselves. And some people are still living in the waiting room of their own lives. Now, let's talk about the ones who stay. Because this is where it gets interesting. The people who remain after you start showing up, honestly, they're going to relate to you differently. And this is another layer of difficulty that no one prepares you for. Even the relationships that survive your transformation will require renegotiation. You'll notice that certain friends suddenly don't call you first with their problems anymore. You'll sense a hesitation, a recalibration happening in real time. Why? Because you've disrupted the script. You were the listener, and now you need to be heard. You were the helper, and now you need help. You were the strong one, and now you're admitting you're tired. And even people who love you, genuinely love you, will stumble through this transition because they've built an internal map of who you are and how you function in their world. And now the landmarks have moved. They're not necessarily resistant to the new you. They're just disoriented by the unfamiliarity of it. This is where patience becomes your most important practice. Not patience with their confusion, that's secondary. Patience with yourself. Because you will be tempted to interpret their disorientation as disapproval. You'll be tempted to read awkwardness as rejection. And in moments of doubt, you'll wonder if authenticity is actually worth the discomfort. Let me answer that for you. It is. Because the alternative is spending the rest of your life managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own integrity. And that's not living. That's hostage negotiation with your own soul. Here's something I wish someone had told me earlier. The discomfort is temporary, but the freedom is permanent. Right now, it feels destabilizing because you're in the liminal space, the gap between who you were pretending to be and who you actually are. But once you cross that threshold fully, once you stop toggling between the performance and the truth, something shifts. You stop monitoring everyone's reactions. You stop calculating how much of yourself is safe to show. You stop translating your own thoughts into a language you think others will accept. You just exist. And the people who can handle that, they become your people. Not because they're perfect, but because they're real. Not because they always understand you, but because they're willing to try. Not because the relationship is easy, but because it's honest. And that times is the entire point. Because I've seen what happens when you spend your entire life trying to be understood by people who were never going to get you. You twist yourself into shapes that don't fit your bones. You apologize for existing. You dim your light so consistently that you forget you were ever bright to begin with. And the cruelest part, even after all that contorting, all that diminishing, all that effort, you're still times misunderstood. Because the problem was never you. The problem was that you were trying to explain color to someone who only wants to see in black and white. I remember talking to a young woman, brilliant, articulate, full of ideas. She told me she'd stopped sharing her thoughts with her family because every time she did, they'd twist her words into something unrecognizable. They hear what they want to hear, she said, and I'm exhausted from trying to correct the record. So she went silent, not because she had nothing to say, but because saying it to people who won't listen felt like screaming into a void that screams back. And I told her what I'm telling you now, asterisk, stop screaming into voids, start speaking to open ears, asterisk. Because here's what I've learned about true connection: it doesn't require you to be someone else. It doesn't demand that you translate yourself into a language that feels foreign on your tongue. True connection happens when you can say, "This is who I am," and the other person responds with, "I see you, and I'm staying." Not "I see you, but you should change." Not "I see you, and here's what you're doing wrong." Just "I see you." And that's enough. That's the relationship worth keeping. That's the friend who deserves your 3 a.m. phone call. That's the partner who earns your vulnerability, because they've proven, through action, not just words, that they can hold the weight of your truth without dropping it, without reshaping it, without handing it back to you in pieces. And yes, I know those people are rare. I know that if you're reading this, you might be thinking, I don't have anyone like that. I'm surrounded by people who don't get me, and I'm starting to believe I'm the problem. You're not the problem, you're just in the wrong room. And I need you to understand something. Being in the wrong room doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're geographically misplaced. It means the people around you aren't equipped for the conversation you're trying to have. And that's okay. Not everyone needs to understand quantum physics, and not everyone needs to understand you. But someone does. Somewhere, there's a person or a handful of people who will hear your story and say, "Oh my God, me too." Who will listen to your fears and not dismiss them. Who will witness your joy and not diminish it with their own insecurity. Your job isn't to find everyone. Your job is to find someone asterisk, and then protect that connection like it's the rarest thing in the world, because it is. I think about the people in my life who truly know me. I can count them on one hand, maybe two if I'm being generous. But those relationships, they're worth more than 1,000 surface-level connections. They're the difference between being surrounded by people and actually being seen, asterisk. And here's what changed when I stopped trying to be understood by everyone and started investing in the people who actually got me. I became more myself, not less. More, because I wasn't spending all my energy translating. I wasn't diluting my thoughts to make them palatable. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. I was just existing, fully, without editing. And the people who love me, they didn't ask me to be different. They asked me to be times more honest, more present, more of whatever I already was. That's what real belonging feels like. Not acceptance despite who you are, but celebration because of who you are. And here's what I stopped doing once I understood that. I stopped trying to decode people. I stopped treating every conversation like a puzzle where I had to figure out the right answer to make someone like me. You know, that exhausting mental math, where you're calculating times. If I say this, they might think that, so I should probably say this other thing instead. But then what if they interpret it as asterisk? It's torture, and it never works, because people can smell calculation from a mile away. I started saying what I actually thought, Not in a rude way, not without consideration, but without that suffocating filter that made everything I said sound like it had been through 15 rounds of editing. And you know what happened? Some people didn't like it. Some people drifted away. And that used to terrify me, the idea that being myself might cost me relationships. But the people who stayed, the relationships got deeper, stronger, more real, because they were based on something solid, who I actually am, not on my ability to perform. I think about my friend Maya. We met at a work thing, small talk, the usual. But then we ran into each other at a bookstore, and she saw what I was buying, some obscure philosophy text and a graphic novel about existential dread. She laughed and said, "That's the most times you times combination I've ever seen." And I realized she times saw times me. Not the work version, not the polished version, but the actual version. The one who thinks about mortality on Tuesday afternoons and also cries at Pixar movies. That's when I understood. The people worth keeping are the ones who see your contradictions and don't ask you to resolve them. They see that you're both serious and silly, both confident and uncertain, both strong and soft, and they don't need you to pick one. I used to think authenticity meant having it all figured out. Like, once I discovered my true self, I'd be this consistent, unwavering person who always knew what to say and how to be. But that's not authenticity. That's just another mask, the mask of having no masks. Real authenticity is messier. It's saying, "I don't know," when you don't know. It's changing your mind. It's being confident on Monday and insecure on Wednesday and not pretending that's a contradiction. It's letting people see that you're not a finished product, you're a person in process. And that's scary because we've been taught that people want consistency, that they want us to be predictable, to fit into the box they've created for us in their mind. But the truth? The people who matter can handle your evolution. They don't need you to stay the same to feel comfortable. I think about my dad. He worked the same job for 30 years, came home at the same time every day, ordered the same thing at restaurants. And when I was younger, I thought that was what being a man meant, being solid, unchanging, reliable in your sameness. But then one day, when I was maybe 25, he told me he'd started taking pottery classes. My dad. And he said, "You know, I spent so long thinking I had to be one thing. Turns out, I can be lots of things." That hit me hard. Because if my dad, the most stable, consistent person I knew, could give himself permission to change, to try something new, to be more than the role he'd been playing, then so could I. I stopped seeing my identity as this fragile thing that would shatter if I deviated from the script. Instead, I started thinking of myself as, I don't know, like a river. Rivers change course all the time. They carve new paths. Sometimes they flood, sometimes they run dry, sometimes they split into tributaries, but they're still rivers. The water keeps moving. You can be a morning person, times and times stay up late sometimes. You can be an introvert times, and times enjoy the occasional party. You can be disciplined, times and times spontaneous. You can be serious times and times playful. You can love routine times and times crave adventure. The "and" is where life actually happens. I started experimenting. Small things at first. I tried wearing colors I'd written off as not me. I said yes to invitations I'd normally decline because that's not my scene. I took a painting class even though I had zero artistic talent, just because I was curious. And you know what I discovered? Most of my identity wasn't actually times mine asterisk, it was just habit. Stories I'd told myself so many times they became true. The thing about personal truths is they're not always times accurate asterisk. They're just times familiar asterisk. I had this moment at a karaoke bar somewhere I never thought I'd be, where this accountant got up and absolutely murdered a Bon Jovi song, like truly terrible. Off key, forgot half the lyrics, didn't care one bit. And everyone loved it. They were cheering, laughing times with times him, not at him. He came off stage, grinning like he'd just won a Grammy. Later I asked him, "How do you do that?" "Just not care what people think." He looked at me like I'd asked him how to breathe. "I'm 47 years old," he said. "I spent the first 40 caring, exhausting, wouldn't recommend it." Then he ordered another beer and went back up for an encore. That's when it clicked. The freedom I was chasing. It wasn't something I had to earn or achieve. It was something I had to time stop, preventing asterisk. I was the one holding myself hostage. I was my own captor. And the door? It was never even locked. Marcus talks about this, about how most of our prisons are self-constructed. We build the walls, install the bars, then wonder why we can't escape. We seek permission from the same mind that's keeping us trapped. The work isn't breaking free. The work is recognizing you were always free. It's recognizing that you can rewrite your rules at any moment. You can forgive yourself. You can try again. You can change your mind about who you are and what you want. You can be wildly inconsistent and still be whole. Because here's the truth nobody tells you. Consistent people aren't actually consistent. They're just good at editing their highlight reel. They're just better at hiding the contradictions. Everyone contains multitudes. Everyone is a walking contradiction. The only difference is some people accept it, and some people exhaust themselves trying to maintain a coherent narrative. I chose acceptance. And slowly, so slowly, I barely noticed I started feeling lighter, like I'd been carrying this invisible weight, and suddenly it was just gone. I stopped policing my thoughts, stopped categorizing every impulse as good or bad, productive or wasteful, worthy or shameful. I let myself be messy. I let myself be in progress. I let myself be human. And that's really what this whole thing comes down to, isn't it? Permission to be human. Permission to be flawed and complicated and ever-changing. Permission to wake up tomorrow as a slightly different version of yourself and have that be okay. Because you're not a brand, you're not a character, you're not a fixed identity that needs defending. You're a living, breathing process. You're allowed to evolve. So, if you're waiting for permission to change, to grow, to contradict yourself, to be more than one thing, consider this it.